Stay tuned for a stained glass panel repair. This poor dragon had a fall and now has a broken neck. The first thing we need to do is remove the broken piece. Now the front has a bit of texture to it, but if we look at the back, it's fairly smooth. So this is the side we're going to score to break out the broken piece. Grab your cutter because here we go. We're going to make multiple scores across the broken piece of glass from a solder seam to another solder seam. You can see I'm making multiple scores with the lines going in the same direction, and they're only about 3/4 of an inch to an inch between each. Then we'll turn the panel slightly and make more scores going in the opposite direction. This is going to create a grid of score lines that span the width of the piece we're removing. Notice how we skipped the middle section there? That's because that's where the glass was already broken. Now, breaking glass like this can get very messy, so please don't forget your safety glasses. There are multiple ways to go about breaking the glass in this situation. Some are more effective than others. Grossing pliers can be used to tap on the glass surface if you don't have a cutter with a ball on the end. It's not the most effective method, but it will work. Once you have a piece or two that falls out, you can use the grossing pliers to nibble and chip away at the glass. Notice how one of the scores separated from the force of what I was doing? This is a really good thing. So now let's move on to the best way to get the job done. You're going to need a cutter that has a ball shape on the end of it. Not all cutters are made this way, and that's why I showed you how to do this with your grossing pliers first. Start by tapping toward the center of the piece of glass, directly under a score line. Once you see it start to run, continue moving along the score to continue the run. Notice the dark lines that have developed where I was tapping? Those are the score lines breaking. These are going to be much easier to see on cathedral glass than opals. Keep tapping under the scores and move around a bit. The main video has been sped up and makes it look like I'm beating hard on the glass, but I'm really not. You'll want to be careful not to be using too much power, or you could actually break more than you bargained for. The small video on the side is in real time and makes me appear a little less maniacal about working on this window. Once you're left with pieces that are directly in contact with the foil, you'll need to grab your pliers to gently pull them out. Wiggling them back and forth often helps loosen the grip of the adhesive, so they'll come out more easily. You may find that you need to move your grip from one side of the panel to the other in order to get enough leverage to loosen the pieces. Keep working at it and don't give up. We need to remove as many of these bits of glass as we can. Now, sometimes the glass just doesn't want to come out, like these two chunks I have here. As I mentioned earlier, don't force things too much because immense strength and glass don't mix well. So the next step will be to remove the foil. Upon closer inspection, you'll notice that there are tiny shards of glass stuck along the foil. But don't worry, these won't get in our way, and I'll show you how we can get rid of the larger bits too. For this next step, you're going to need your soldering tools, including a small pair of pliers that you don't mind getting corroded. With most of the glass out of the way, we're going to melt off the excess solder. We'll start by applying flux to the solder all around the opening on the front and on the back of the panel. To get started, look for a place that is free of any chunks of glass and start melting the solder. Once you get the solder warmed up, you can tip the panel so that the solder can fall off. You want to melt it back until you can see a faint dip right down the middle of the seam, showing the separation between the two pieces of foil. Just like you can see here. That means that you've removed enough solder to move on to the next step. Now, notice that I have the area I'm working on of the panel closest to the table. This is so that the solder can fall off, but that it doesn't have so far to fall that it's going to splash back up and hit me. I've been there, done that, and it's absolutely one of those live and learn lessons. So you're going to keep working your way around the opening. Be patient. It does take a little time, but you'll get there. Once this side is done, it'll be time for side 2. So some people will teach you to use your iron and push the foil back before we even remove the glass. Now the reason I didn't do that is so that the foil is still in its original shape. There's going to be a little lip from the edge of the foil that you can grab onto with your pliers. Personally, I like using needle nose jewelry pliers with a curved tip, as I find that they're fine enough to grab the open edge of the foil. So this next step is crucial. The goal here is to melt the solder and gently pull the scrap foil away from the foil on the adjoining piece of glass. And I can't stress this enough. You need to be sure it's melted before you start pulling. If you start pulling and it's not quite melted, you're going to actually start tearing the foil that's on the surrounding pieces of glass, and then you're going to have to remove more during your repair. So go slow, make sure it's melted. Remove any leftover bits of glass before pulling the foil. And you're going to notice that this is much easier to remove than before we started soldering. And that's because there isn't a rigid piece of metal holding it in place anymore. Continue working your way around the opening. If you're gentle enough, you can remove the whole strip of foil in one piece, which is so much easier than trying to chase down tiny little sections of it. This part of the process is going to take a little bit of time, especially if it's your first panel repair that you're working on. Just take your time, go slowly, get comfortable with the process, and just keep working away at it, removing a little bit of extra solder at a time. Because the last piece of glass is in such a tight corner, I'm leaving it for last. And you'll notice here how I keep shifting the panel. That's so that the blobs of solder have somewhere to go so that they don't stay attached. Now, to deal with that stubborn piece of glass. Using a utility knife, I work the blade carefully under the edge of the foil and then tilt it upward. I'm trying to make the opening large enough so that the glass can actually pop out of there. Working from both sides of the panel to release as much of the adhesive as I can. Since the glass still won't come out, I'm using the soldering iron to melt the solder and the knife at the same time to push the foil out of the way while the solder is molten. After a little persistence, success. Now it's just to remove the last bit of foil. Ta-da! So before we can make a template, we need to smooth out the edge of the openings. And to do that, we'll just remove the extra solder so that we have a perfect traceable shape. Slip a piece of paper underneath the glass and trace the shape with a pencil. To get the best fit, angle your pencil slightly so that the pencil lead is in the little nook where the glass and paper meet. Once cut, ground, and foiled, you can move on to adding the new piece of glass to your project. If you lay the glass into the opening, you'll notice that it doesn't quite sit flush with the panel. Instead, it will likely be low enough to create a little step up all the way around the piece. So what we need to do is lift the piece of glass so that it sits flush with the panel. Here I'm using a piece of chipboard from my paper crafting supplies, but 2 pieces of cereal boxes stacked on top of each other would probably create about the same thickness. Cut your riser so that it fits comfortably inside the opening and is large enough to support your glass insert evenly so it doesn't rock. Put the new piece of glass in place and check to make sure it's flush. If it's not, you'll need to play with the thickness so that the glass sits at the right height. Then you can move on to soldering. And there you have it, a repair to a copper foil stained glass panel. All this piece needs now is a good cleaning, some patina, and a polish. Thanks for watching.